particularly the essay, What is Metaphysics, and how, in the context of modernity, what I've been calling this liminal point of Western civilization, which comes to its end in the production of the world picture, and from a historical point of view, the disaster of the consequence, so to speak, of the imperialist colonial project of the 19th century, World War I, and its extension in World War II, and the precipitation of, however resistant, and nevertheless the precipitation of all of Western humanity of a kind of anxiety, general anxiety, as to that in precisely the sense of anxiety as Heidegger understands it, which has no thing or nothing as its object. And culminating in his analysis with that one single paragraph: anxiety reveals the nothing. Anxiety reveals the nothing. This is the event, from my perspective, of modernity, and which we must pay attention to and must not resist. But of course, much is at stake in preventing the nothing from manifesting itself in such a way that it demands recognition and dealing with it. So, or another way of putting it is that this nothing, the nothingness of being, has been a specter that has haunted Western civilization from the very beginning. That is equally important a dimension of this essay as the passage that we looked at last time closely. That sense that Heidegger is articulating that the Western consciousness, the modern Western consciousness, is haunted by, has always been haunted by, the nothing. He stresses that just before the passage that we looked at last time, and I want to come back to this. I want to come back to this because this notion of spectre has become the spectre of temporality, the spectre of the nothingness of being, the spectre of, let's make it clear, it should be clear by this time, but let me repeat. When I say the nothing, just as in the Western metaphysical tradition, the truth discourse of the metaphysical tradition, the nothing is not just the nothing ontologically speaking. It manifests itself at a variety of registers, a variety of sites. The nothingness per se, the nothingness of being per se, a subject, or an understanding of the subject which is without an identity, an ethos which is undeveloped, a variety of human beings who, because they're not identifiable as white, as male, as oriented by the truth of Western civilization, are nobodies, and all the way across the continuum of being, from the nothing to the social and political. We're dealing, in other words, when we use the word nothing in this class, we mean precisely that whole relay. And increasingly, of course, this will become more manifest. I've already, established certain key terms that are crucial to the late post-structuralists, the part of no part, the countless, the ungrievable. These are the nobodies in the world. And remember, you've got to see this in the context not as just theoretical articulations of certain entities, but as a fundamental historical reality of our moment, of our liminal moment. The moment, as I've said before, when in the context of the disasters of World War I, the disaster of World War II, and the disasters throughout the 20th century, and not least the Vietnam War, the Cold War and the Vietnam War, the precipitation of the disintegration of the nation state, the precipitation of a demography that is characterized by the refugee, a global demography which is characterized by the refugee, the displaced person, the countless. So this nothing is not just a philosophical concept, it's also a historical concept. Think, for example, of one of the most painful and agonizing of many conditions of groups of people, the Palestinian, for example, Palestinians who have been reduced to refugee status, the vast majority of the Palestinians reduced to refugee status, homeless. It's in this context that is tremendously important to constantly be aware of the fact that the nothing is a political category. The nothing extends itself into the eco, racial, gender political. Heidegger, of course, and this is one of his great failures, as it was for so many post-structuralists, almost monomaniacally maintained a focus on the ontological, the nothingness of being, and as a consequence, of course, he got himself into a lot of trouble as to where he stood politically, to the point where now he is no longer welcomed in the academic community. When I first came to Binghamton, Heidegger was a presence everywhere in this university that had anything to do with social humanist studies, philosophical, literary humanist studies. Now, he doesn't exist, precisely because a certain academic momentum has that represents his thinking as totalitarian and Nazi. has really been that battle. And as I said, this was one of the great failures of Heidegger. His unwillingness, his refusal, for whatever reason, to see the continuity between the nothingness precipitated by history at this liminal point that has always haunted Western civilization, particularly modernity, and the nothings, the more political nothings that are aspects of the nothingness of being from the point of view of Western civilization. But I also want to say that Heidegger, and I'll show you this. I also want to say that Heidegger was not absolutely blind to this continuity, this continuum that I'm talking about. He makes reference to it. I will get to this a little bit later, maybe next time. We certainly will get to this when we talk about his essay on humanism, the letter on humanism he wrote to Beaufret. But for the time being, let's attend to this notion of the spectre from Heidegger's point of view, this notion of the spectre as a principle, as a phenomenon which has haunted the true discourse of Western civilization from the very beginning. The structure of the essay, What is Metaphysics, is precisely such that it makes that prominent. That's why I want to make sure that you see that. That's one reason, because it's crucial to a full understanding of this essay. This notion of Heidegger's effort to show that the nothing has haunted, is a spectral element that has haunted Western concepts of truth. But I also want to make this notion of this metaphor it's not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. The spectre is the spectre of the nothingness of being is a reality. But we'll call it a metaphor. I also want to emphasize the spectrality of the nothingness of being that Heidegger introduced very early on in post-structuralist evolution, because the spectre has become the spectre of this nothing, the nothingness of being, has become a term that has emerged in post-structuralist theory itself to characterize this very difficult thing to take hold of, this spectrality of the nothing. And I cite one very important, very significant post-structuralist text to cover many, and that is Jacques Derrida's Spectres of Marx. That book is a extension into the domain of the political, into the domain of the question of what has Marx got to contribute to the contemporary world. and it's an extension of Heidegger's analysis of the nothing and its spectral status in the modern Western consciousness, specters of mind. And Derrida's term in that book, Specters of Marx, he also talks about an international community, just to say Agamben will talk about the common community. He calls it a messianic community, an international community, but a communism, but a communism which is very, very different from the Marx, the way Marx's concept of communism has been represented by the communists, by the dominant culture, by the orthodox communists. And the term that he uses to talk about this certain spirit of Marxism, of Marxist Marxism, by way of invoking the nothing, is the idea of the revenant, the one that constantly returns, the revenant, the constantly returns to haunt the discourse of any finalizing perspective. So this notion of the spectre will be a fundamental motif that runs all the way through the school. And that's the other reason why it's so important is precisely because of the status of that which is being referred to as spectral. The spectral is precisely another category of the nothing. What the something in the truth discourse of Western civilization would call something which is not something. This is phantasma, a phantasm. It's phantasmatic, not anything that's substantial, which is fundamental to the truth of the Western modernity. With all the implications of this being a falsehood. Anyway, and in that sense, takes its place along with all the other categories of nothing that is fundamental to the anthropological, modern anthropological tradition. But but what I want to focus on here, this is on page 96, almost at the beginning of the essay. Yet, when we follow the most proper intention in all the sciences, we relate ourselves to beings themselves. He's talking generally, the term he uses is science in this passage, throughout the entire essay. But science does not mean, for Heidegger here, in this particular passage, science in the literal sense that we understand the term science. He means it science in the etymological sense of knowledge. Knowledge as knowledge has come down to us through the auspices of modern empirical inquiry. It's when he uses the word science, in other words, he means all forms of modern knowledge production, whether scientific, biological, or humanist. The scientific fields are just one paragraph above. The scientific fields are quite diverse. The way they treat their objects of inquiry differ fundamentally. Today, only the technical organization of universities and faculties consolidate their burgeoning multiplicities of disciplines. The practical establishment of goals for each discipline provides the only meaningful source of unity. Nonetheless, the rootedness of the sciences is in their essential ground. The rootedness of the sciences in their essential ground has atrophied. Yet, when we follow their most proper intention, their logic, their most proper, their essential logic, when we follow them, in all the sciences, we relate ourselves to beings themselves, in the sense of beings understood as things. Precisely from the point of view of the sciences or disciplines, no field takes precedence over another. Neither nature over history, nor vice versa. No particular way of treating objects of inquiry dominates the other. Mathematical knowledge is no more rigorous than philological historical knowledge. It merely has the character of exactness, which does not coincide with rigor. To demand exactness in the study of history is to violate the idea of the specific rigor of the humanities. The relation to the world that pervades all the sciences as such lets them, each according to its particular content and mode of being, seek beings themselves, things, in order to make them the objects of investigation and to determine their ground. According to the idea behind them, in the sciences, we approach what is essential in things, in all things, all across the continuum of being, in all things. And of course, what he's emphasizing is that this emphasis of science, knowledge production on understanding being as being an investigation into things and nothing else, he's also saying that what is being negated, what is being marginalized, what is being annulled is any whatever that is not a thing. That is not a thing, like time. Heidegger determined this essay, which said, is nothing, the nothing of being, nothingness of being. According to the idea behind them, in the sciences we approach what is essential in all things. This distinctive relation to the world in which we turn towards beings themselves is supported and guided by a freely chosen attitude of human existence. And this is assumed to be a matter of free agency, whereas in reality it's the opposite. To be sure, man's pre-scientific and extra-scientific activities also are related to being. But science is exceptional in that, in a way peculiar to it, it gives the matter itself explicitly and solely the first and last word. In such impartiality of inquiring, determining, and grounding, a peculiar delineated submission to being themselves obtains a subordination of all the potentialities of the human being who's acquiring to this authority, determining authority of being themselves and nothing else. So that this freedom is not a freedom, it's a determination. This position of service, not freedom, service, what I've been calling the vocation that is implicit in man's assuming of a higher cause and the calling of a higher cause. This position of service in research and theory evolves in such a way as to become the ground of the possibility of a proper, though limited, leadership in the whole of human existence. The special relation science sustains to the world and the attitude of man that guides it can, of course, be fully grasped only when we see and comprehend what happens in the relation to the world so attained. Man, and here Heidegger clearly means anthropological man who would triumph over the theologos. Man, one being among others, pursues science. In this pursuit, nothing less transpires than the eruption by one being called man into the whole of beings. Indeed, in such a way, that's to say, man now takes over from where God was, the theologos was in the prior dispensation, in the theological dispensation. In this pursuit, nothing less transpires than the eruption by one being called man into the whole of being. Indeed, in such a way that in and through this eruption, beings break open and show what they are and how they are. The eruption that breaks open in this way helps beings, above all, to themselves. This trinity, relation to the world, attitude to the world, and the eruption of man in that world, in its radical unity becomes a luminous simplicity and aptness of design to scientific equipment. If we are to take explicit possession of the design illuminated in this way by science and this trinity for ourselves, then we must say, and Heidegger is emphasizing, we have no other alternative. We are compelled to say, one, that to which the relation to the world refers are beings themselves and nothing beside. Two, that from which every attitude takes its guidance are beings themselves and nothing further. And you can see by way of this hyphen and the nothing else that he's making us deeply aware of what this truth has to annul to make its claim to be the truth. That from which the scientific confrontation in the eruption occurs are being themselves, and beyond that, nothing. And then he goes on. But what is remarkable is that precisely in the way scientific man secures to himself what is most properly his, he speaks of something different. What should be examined are beings only, and besides that, nothing. Beings alone, and further, nothing. Solely beings, and beyond that, nothing. And therefore the question, what about this nothing that scientific man has to speak about in order to disclaim it? What about this nothing? The nothing is rejected precisely by science, given up as a nullity, as a nothing. But when we give up the nothing in such a way, don't we just concede it? Can we, however, speak of concession when we concede nothing? But perhaps our confused talk always degenerates into an empty squabble over words. Against it, science must now reassert its seriousness and soberness of mind, insisting that it is concerned solely with being, the nothing, from a scientific perspective. What else can it be for science but an outrage? An outrage and a phantasm, the absolute antithesis of the truth, a lie, a sick lie, a psychological lie, a phantasm. If science is right, then only one thing is sure. Science wishes to know nothing about the nothing. Ultimately, this is the scientifically rigorous conception of the nothing. We know it, the nothing, in that we wish to know nothing about it. Science wants to know nothing of the nothing. Notice how he insistently repeats that absolute and fundamental condition of scientific knowledge. But even so, it is certain that when science tries to express its proper essence, it calls upon the nothing for help. It has recourse to what it rejects. What incongruous state of affairs reveals itself here? What I want to suggest, and Heidegger doesn't use the term, but I do, I will. What I want to suggest is that the truth discourse of Western modern, the truth discourse that has become, dominant and fundamental in modernity, is a lie. That's the great irony. The truth discourse in all its manifestations is fundamentally a lie. The term that has always been used by poststructuralism is a fiction or a construct. But more bluntly, but no less accurate, it's been a lie. The truth equals a falsehood, a lie. But in this particular passage, and in much of post-structuralist thinking, not least the psychoanalytic versions of it, and that kind of thing like that, it's a lie complicated by a certain twisted psyche, which I call paranoia. And that's what I'm sensing in that paragraph that we just read from Heidegger's analysis of the ferociousness of sciences, modern truth discourses, refusal to acknowledge, to even think seriously about the nothing. It's willful imposition of phantasmagoric categories on the nothing. Nothing is not real. It's in that sense that reading this essay, What is Metaphysics, suggests so strongly that the nothing is a phenomenon which haunts deeply, profoundly, disturbingly haunts the truth discourse of civilization, and why, therefore, the notion of the spectrality of the nothing, in all its various manifestations, not simply the ontological. And indeed, it's important to be conscious of these other more, let's say, worldly or political sides of the nothing, because it's very easy to dismiss the ontological nothing, because that's such an abstract category. It's much more difficult to dismiss, say, the Palestinian, for example, the nobody who's a Palestinian, to say nothing about so many other entities of being that have been reduced to this status by the truth of Western civilization, modernity.
Why does this nothing only haunt the Western civilization and is not more like ontologically based? As why doesn't it haunt like all civilizations?
Yeah. There's no question that cultures outside of Western civilization have also dealt with this problem, and have, in so many ways, oriented their understanding of being in terms of this kind of panoptic or metaphysical thinking. The difference, however, there's a fundamental difference, however, and that is that whereas these other cultures have not systematically developed that metaphysical perspective in such a way that it becomes definitive in this civilization. You can't say that about Indian civilization. You can't say that about Chinese civilization. You can't say this about Buddhist civilization, so on and so on. There's always this, I would even go so far as to say, there's always this awareness, strong awareness of a positivity of another, particularly, for example, in Buddhism. Whereas in Western civilization, and that's why we've been calling it an onto-theological tradition, to indicate that it has been willfully, and I'm saying paranoidally committed to work out this logic in such a way that it becomes identifiable as a kind of civilization. That's the way that's basically, I need to say a lot more about your question, which is important question and has to be kept in mind. And the other thing that I would say is that this difference that I've been articulating all too broadly is manifest in the fact that it is precisely this distinction that the vagueness of ontological perspectives of other cultures that so troubles and so determines the exceptionalism of Western civilization over the other, and has generated the colonial, the imperial colonial project from the 15th century on, 14th century, 15th century on. That's not a good answer. It's too summary, but that would be my starting point in answering that question. And anyway, what you should be thinking about.
So then, if we acknowledge the nothing, is it possible, or should we expect that the specter sort of transubstantiates into a reality, into a being for investigation?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but say that again.
If we acknowledge the nothing, is there a shift from the spectral to the real, to this a thingness?
Absolutely. The Heidegger and the post-structuralists effort to retrieve the nothing, which has been annulled by scientific discourse, modern scientific discourse, not for its own sake, but for positive thought. That's a term you may not have heard, but which is insistent in everything that I say about the retrieval of the nothing. We must think it in a positive way. And as we'll see, this is what the later post-structuralists, what I call it post-post-structuralists, will be doing. That's exactly what they'll be doing. To think the nothing as entities, but as entities which are not entities as they've been represented by the Western, modern Western tradition, without identities. For example, the human being. Whereas the human being, as we've seen from this essay itself, is assumed to be a thing, like every other thing, more complicated than but nevertheless a thing that's analyzable, scientifically analyzable. It has an identity. Well, what about the idea that of a human being that is without an identity, has no thing for its identity? What about that? It's one of the deep concerns of contemporary post-theory, fundamental to post-structuralist thinking and post-post-structuralist thinking. What would a human being be like who is not identified as being present to him or herself, as having an identity? What kind of human being would that be? This is the kind of question that is being explored.
Would a human being with no identity still be a thing of itself?
Then the human being that is without identity cannot be identified as a thing, is much more complicated, and much more true to the human being and to being itself, insofar as being is a lot more than just thingness. Anyway, So yeah, if you attend to Heidegger's rhetoric, i.e. that we can't, we have every right to put it this way, that science is a paranoia. Science is a lie. Then we have no other alternative than to think the nothing that has been reduced to this, annulled to this lot to a lie. To see what the positive possibilities are. So one of our concerns in invoking, in retrieving the nothing, will be to, following the directives of the retrieval, to think is positive possibility. What are the positive possibilities of the nothing? And as I said, this will be the concern of post-post structures, second half of this course. But you'll see that what all of these thinkers have in common, these post-structuralist theories have in common, is some sense of, even as early as Heidegger, who resisted the political in favor of the ontological. Even in Derrida, who resisted the political in favor of the textual, and so on and so forth. All of them, in some degree or other, however tentative, saw, intuited, this absolute continuity, one, between the ontological interpretation of being and the political, and as things, and also that continuum of the nothingness that it had to repress, it had to annul in order to arrive at that concept of truth. Science wants to know nothing of the nothing. But even so, it is certain that when science tries to express its proper essence, it calls upon the nothing for help. It has recourse to what it rejects. What incongruous state of affairs revealed itself here? And again, remember that this could only happen, I should say, it only happened, from an historical perspective, it could only happen at the moment when the logic of metaphysical thinking fulfills itself, comes to its end. Okay. There have been, of course, in the whole history of Western civilization, multiple voices who have had different interpretations, different than metaphysical interpretation. From the Greeks, even in the Roman period, in the theological period, and so on and so forth, all the way through. But these figures have been represented as marginal. They've been represented in the Western tradition as erratic, errant, as dangers, threats to the truth discourse of Western civilization. Deeply attracted to them, take for example someone like Rabelais, deeply attracted, but, my figure would say Herman Melville, deeply attracted because of the power of his writing, yet obsessed paranoidally in representing Melville, or Rabelais, and many others, in ways that accommodates their texts to the true discourse of Western civilization. This is one of the great hidden realities, obliterated realities of the Western literary tradition. How it has had to either annul voices that would retrieve the positive potentialities of nothing from metaphysical thinking, or have interpreted those resistances in such a way as to accommodate them to the truth of Western civilization. That's one reason why literary studies, through the agency of post-structuralists, the post-revolutionists, is no longer, cannot any longer be canonical. We teach English literature, we teach American literature, we teach Italian literature, we teach Russian literature, canonical literature. That structure of literary, what we call canonical structure of literary studies, is no longer viable. Can't do that anymore. And of course, the problem right now is that the literary studies, the humanist studies, are in utter and absolute disarray because, in my mind, because those people who have deeply committed to the retrieval of I don't want to put it that way, I'll backtrack. By those people who have become part of the post-structuralist dispensation in kind of general way, have not been have not given their fidelity to thinking the positive potentiality of the nothing that has disintegrated the disciplinary structure of humanistic studies. So what we've got is a disarray, as for example in our English department, if you have any sense of it's such a situation. But nevertheless, disarray, but nevertheless, still possible, but still the reorientation in such a way to make literary studies a dynamic and positive socio-political activity in behalf of a coming community, which, in my mind, what it's all about. With the reflection of our contemporary existence as one determined by science, we find ourselves enmeshed in a controversy. In the course of this controversy, a question has already evolved. A question has evolved in the context of a scientific truth which has answered all the questions. A question. So the nothing equals the articulation of a question about the truth of being. And this is why I also invariably, when I invoke the nothingness of being, I also invoke the ontological notion that the question is prior, ontologically prior to the answer. Being precipitates the question as fundamental, always already, over the answer. Being is, the question is, just as the being of being, or the nothingness of being prior to being itself, being with a capital letter, things themselves, so also the question is ontologically prior to the answer. And coming back to your comment, one of the fundamental characteristics that is being thought by post-structuralists vis-a-vis this new kind of being is that he's not an answerer. He always asks questions. His humanity is fundamentally identified by his question. Always question. And of course, that's another way of saying he is utterly, and she is utterly and absolutely free in the most radical sense of the word, free. If the identity is prior to the nothing or difference, time, or if the answer is prior to the question, then the human being is not free. The human being is determined, is in servitude to some kind of higher external cause. Of course, putting it all this way, we're going way beyond Heidegger. But what I'm trying to suggest is that the post-structuralists, the post-structuralists, have had as a fundamental premise. This is the point that I would make. Again, it's controversial, but the point that I would want to make and have you think about that post-structuralism is a radicalization of Heidegger's ontological insights, and it has often been called as such a left Heideggerianism. That term, left Heideggerianism. Badiou, Rancière, Butler, Agamben, people like that have been called tentatively, but we're dealing with a very tentative topic. So I hope that has become clear by this time. Okay, so.
Professor, would there be a right Heideggerianism?
There, of course, the whole anti-Heideggerian movement is identified Heidegger with a right, with a political right, and people like, say, Habermas, who identified in no uncertain terms Heidegger's thinking with national socialism. That's a topic that is enormously complicated, and it deserves treatment, no question about that. But it is so complicated that it will require something much more than a few comments that we make in the course like this. I can only say that I think that the attacks on Heidegger, which, as I've said earlier, have won the debate as far as Heidegger is concerned, have been mismanaged, misthought, prematurely arrived at in negative terms towards an identification of Heidegger with right-wing thinking. Heidegger is infinitely more complicated than that. And as I said, it is precisely to retrieve the radical potentialities of Heidegger's thought that post-structuralists like Badiou and Zizek and so on and so forth are returning to Heidegger to draw out this left-oriented, this radical-oriented perspective, which Heidegger didn't think for whatever reason. That's not a good answer to your question, but the topic is too massive to give you.
Well, the question where it came from my angle is, if you've got somebody like Carl Schmitt, there's an established Carl Schmitt literature that is left and right. And there's an established Heidegger literature that seems to be left. But when I was processing the issue of a left Heideggerianism, I couldn't place anybody into right Heideggerianism, meaning I could place the accusers, Habermas, Adorno, et al., but I couldn't place anyone into the category of being a right Heideggerian since Heidegger was active or was writing, or even today. So today we can look at Carl Schmitt's writing, and we've got everyone on one side, and then you look at a lot of German contemporary conservatism, and they write approvingly of Carl Schmitt as well. But I don't see right-wing literature or right-wing philosophy that's citing Heidegger approvingly.
It's basically from the point of view of left-oriented to people like Habermas, who have identified Heidegger as basically a deeply politically conservative thinker. There are, though I forget now, there are though German thinkers, contemporary German, not philosophers, but historians. There are a couple of historians whose names now escape me, who use Heidegger as the basis of their very conservative historical orientations. One very well-known, whose name I can't remember offhand, had a great prominence at the time when Victor Farias came out with his book on Heidegger and National Socialism, created this great controversy which eventually wiped Heidegger out. Not to say Farias himself, the former student of Heidegger, who began this whole thing, ran from a basically conservative perspective. Anyway, so whatever the ambiguities of Heidegger's thinking, And I don't want to dismiss these ambiguities. That's why I made this point. It's a lot more complicated. And my point is that if we simply go along with the simple identification of Heidegger with German National Socialism, we are shooting ourselves in our foot in the sense that those of us on the left side who are unhappy with the polity that is a legacy of the Western ontological tradition, missing enormous suggestive potentialities which would be beneficial to the thinking of the new polity. That's basically my position. And what I would suggest next time when we read the essay on humanism and the essay on technology, particularly with regard to tech, what I would try to suggest is that as minimal as Heidegger's insights were vis-a-vis a radical communal politics, there are very strong moments in Heidegger's text which you cannot escape and you must attend to. You cannot escape it. Had we time, I would have included in our reading lectures, his Parmenides lectures, which do not have, which in my mind are about as important a document of Heidegger's thinking. Heidegger's thinking at the time when he comes to realize that he's gone astray by way of adopting, of becoming a member of the National Socialist Party, but he kind of a reciprocal conjoined to his own identification with National Socialism. In the middle of World War II, the Parmenides lecture, in which, in a way that I'll make some reference to this next time, but in the context of the letter on humanism and the essay concerning technology. But here I can only say that had there been time enough, I would have included that. But I hope that we can make a suggestion about the Parmenides in the light of the essay on humanism, which in my mind it follows, although the Parmenides lectures come before the letter on humanism. Okay, so one philosophical, ontological point I want to make in relationship to concluding point I want to make in relationship to this essay, What is Benefit, which we've been thinking about, and the nothingness of being. And that has to do with the phrase, the Heideggerian phrase, that which, in opposition to the scientific understanding of human being, human life, Dasein, as ultimately a thing, however complicated, a thing that can be measured. Heidegger understands human being Dasein, as we said last time, thrown in the world, but much more specific and philosophical as ontic-ontological. Both these at the same time. Ontic meaning thing, a thing, or a world oriented by thingness. He's a thing. Insofar he's part of being, but he's also and simultaneously and indissolubly related, ontological. This is not a thing, which insofar as that he's has a consciousness. Or another alternative phrase that Heidegger uses to characterize the ontic ontological character of human being, Dasein, is that he's, and this is much more expressive of what Heidegger means and what I mean, he is an ek-system in-system, hyphen in-system. Ek-system, system meaning being in. Ek-system, outside, in, outside in. He is outside and inside at the same time. Simultaneously. His function, according to Heidegger, in the ontotheological tradition, the Western tradition, is to get his existence entirely outside the in-system. To transcend, to rise above his in-system situation. And that's been his catastrophic failure. And he's saying we cannot escape, we cannot get outside of, and we must not get outside of our ex-system, in-system condition. This is what gives us our humanity. This is why we are human. Precisely the stones are in-system, period. Humans are in-system, ex-system, in-system. Simultaneously. This is our condition. This is and it's inescapable. Agamben, I think it's in the coming community, refers to it. Again, I invoke Agamben a lot because he was a student of Heidegger and is one of the most open and aggressive radicalizers of Heidegger's thinking. Many of the others that we're going to talk about are not quite as open about their continuity with Heidegger. Agamben has no problems with that, just as I have no problem. And he refers to this situation, Dasein's ex-system, in-system condition, as irreparable. You can't repair it. It's the way things are. And you have to live within, human beings have to live within that. It's irreparable. Again, see how, what the implications of irreparability are later on when we talk about Agamben and Bangun and so on and so forth. Ex-system, in-system. Which is to say, he is, human beings are those things in the world who are capable of asking the question. asking questions. Um, uh, and therefore, here, I'm not sure how my other colleagues in the post-structuralist dispensation would respond to this. But I personally would say that this is one that makes the human being the paradox that he or she is. One, potentiality to be a master of the rest of being, insofar he's got he, she has consciousness. Or, and this is my orientation, or the caretaker, to use Heidegger's very crucial word, Sorge, in being and time, as a fundamental existential characteristic of Dasein, of the human being. Care, his ability to care. As caretaker. In other words, rather than thinking of man as master of being, caretaker of being. That's his burden. That's the burden of humanity. Being relies on Dasein to care for those aspects of being, like the ego, for example, or like other human beings, like economic phenomena and so on and so forth. It becomes his burden to care, make sure that they survive in their own integrity, integrity. Okay, I'll stop here, and it's an appropriate place to stop because the next thing we'll talk about is the question of technology, where man, rather than becoming careful, has become of being, become the master of being, the master of being, and the reduction of being that entails.